Hello and welcome everyone. I am beyond excited to invite you in for CFS Plus. It's Global Fashion Agenda's online event on sustainable fashion. I'm Eva Kruse. I'm going to be your host for the next 2 days here from the Copenhagen Concert Hall. Usually we fill up this space with around 1,500 people from all over the world, industry leaders, politicians, and different voices that are affecting how our industry is developing on sustainability. Because of COVID, we had to cancel Copenhagen Fashion Summit, but in its replacement, we've created this new digital beast called CFS Plus. And since we've all become so digitally savvy during the crisis, I'm sure that both you and many, many more are able to join us for this event this year. The next 2 days will be jam-packed with some of the most exciting stories and content pieces, discussing how our beloved industry of fashion can become a prosperous business that works within the planetary boundaries and in harmony with people and planet. CFS Plus is delivered under the headline Redesigning Value. But let me underline one thing before we kick it off. There will only be a green lining to the moment we have in time if we are able to reconcile our aspirations for short-term prosperity with a lens of long-term actions that will create an industry that works in balance with people and planet. I've been looking so forward to this moment, and we've been working really hard to get to a place to deliver this CFS Plus. I bid you all welcome.
So what exactly is CFS Plus? Let's start with the basics. This is Global Fashion Agenda. We're a nonprofit organization on a mission to mobilize the fashion industry to take bold and urgent action on sustainability. We convene political decision makers, top industry leaders, organizations, and more on sustainability transformation. And for over a decade, we've been behind the world's leading event for all of this, Copenhagen Fashion Summit. This year, we introduced something new. Copenhagen Fashion Summit Plus, or CFS Plus. CFS Plus, a highly engaging and entertaining digital content platform that will go live the 12th and 13th of October, and it's free of charge for everyone to join. CFS Originals, bringing to life stories and formats that will take you behind the scenes of fashion and the most innovative minds. We will take you into the heart of the solutions that will drive our industry forward in balance with people and the planet. GFA Explains will take some of the most complex topics and turn them into digestible information, facts, and numbers. CFS Live is 2 to 3 hours of exciting case studies, live discussions, workshops, and roundtables with industry leaders, experts, and big thinkers. CFS The Show, a 1-hour live show that ties it all together, featuring industry executives, leading creatives, and important voices every day of the event. But we also bring you the possibility to go beyond watching with CFS Innovation Forum, connecting you with the sustainable innovations revolutionizing the fashion system across each step of the supply chain. Matchmaking gives representatives from fashion brands and retailers the opportunity for tailored one-on-one meetings with solution providers covering the entire value chain, from innovative materials to responsible packaging solutions. CFS Design Studio is curated especially for creative directors and designers. The Digital Design Studio will showcase exciting solutions to boost sustainability. All of this on the 12th and 13th of October. The only thing you have to do is register in advance. We're excited to bring you the new features and invite you to join us in making sustainability fashion's first priority.
My very first guest here at CFS Plus is no one less than Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess Mary of Denmark, who is the patron of Global Fashion Agenda, and actually the only speaker that has been speaking as a keynote speaker at every single Copenhagen since 2009. She is a strong advocate for sustainability and a big humanitarian, and with a strong focus, especially also on women across the world. Your Royal Highness, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here in now the almost empty concert house, where we usually have all of our international friends and voices from all over the world.
It is quite a contrast.
It is.
And, you know, it reflects the times we are living in right now. I mean, the worrying times. And it is sad, because it's so nice to meet people from all corners of the globe, to be able to hear everyone's different reflections and great ideas and innovations. But we'll continue to do that. You've planned a great 2 days.
We have. Some of them are going to be brought to life in pre-produced pieces where we come even closer, I would say, because we're at their homes or closer to them for longer times. And then we are also going to deliver like live Zoom set up panels where some of those important discussions and debates are going to happen. So yeah, it's going to be 2 exciting days still. Yeah. It's definitely been a difficult year. I mean, COVID obviously has impacted everybody, but not least the fashion industry, with lockdowns and stores were closed, and, you know, big impacts on the supply chain. But how has it been for you and your life?
Yeah, like everyone, our life has been turned on its head. I mean, we're living and experiencing a global pandemic, the worst health crisis in 100 years. We've seen how societies all around the world have been closed down from one day to the next, where our freedom of movement, which we cherish so deeply, has been so incredibly restricted. And also, of course, the tragedy of losing loved ones.
The year of COVID-19 has, of course, also impacted the supply chain and some of the sort of weakest links of fashion, namely for the workers. And I know that you've been traveling and you've seen, you know, not this year, but previous years also, you know, met people in the supply chain and seen the conditions they're working on. So how has that affected your view on things this year, thinking of them?
Well, COVID has had broad-reaching impact and consequences in all corners of the globe and in all areas of our societies. And when crisis strikes, the most poor and vulnerable are disproportionately affected. Yeah. And we know the fashion industry is a huge employer. And the majority of those employed are women. And you're right, I traveled to Bangladesh and I had the opportunity to visit a factory and some workers, talk to some of the workers there. And if we take Bangladesh as an example, I mean, that's a country that is very dependent on the textile industry. 80% of their export is through textile and fashion. So, and they produce 4 million people are employed, and 85% of them are women. Yeah. And we already know today that 1 million garment workers have been laid off. Now, the factory that I visited, maybe it's not completely representative of all the factories in Bangladesh, but we know that a job and financial independence gives enormous security and hope for the future. I spoke with a number of women there and heard about what it means from them to be unemployed. And the contrast of having a job to not having a job is stark indeed. These women have become financially independent. They are able to support their family and also their local communities. They have a voice in their families and in their communities because they have financial independence. They also are able to invest in their children, their health, their education. So I can imagine for these women that have lost their job because of reduced production and factory closures, that they're in a very dire situation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fashion got too fast, too much, too quick. And really, there's an opportunity for us to slow things down. And that's what I think needs to change. A slower, more thoughtful industry that's about product, that's about craft, that's about people.
We need to move towards radical equality. We can talk about technological innovation all we like, but the one innovation we've never tried is to treat each other as equals.
The fashion industry needs to develop new metrics to measure success.
I think what really needs to change is the need to understand the impact of decisions across the entire supply chain and taking full responsibility for it.
We need to move from the optimization of the current system to a transformation to a totally new system. And as Bill McDonald often says, being less bad is simply not good enough. We have to do better.
I think we need to close the inequality gap that currently exists within the fashion industry.
We need for more actors across the global fashion system, publications, retailers, influencers or fashion weeks to make sustainability mandatory.
We have to take responsibility. We have to stop talking and take action.
One of the fundamentals that need to change is that the industry needs to become much more consumer-centric.
Fashion needs to hold itself to a higher purpose that involves social impact, that involves correcting regressive systems that benefited only a few, not the many.
Giving back more than what we take. Imagine if we could take this approach at the industry level. We could literally be part of the solution in fighting climate change and restoring nature. We could change the path of our collective future.
I'm excited to present to you this first CFS Originals pre-produced content piece called Real Talk. As the name indicates, the format is about no bullshit, and hopefully it's also somewhat provocative. We have a tendency in fashion and in many industries to surround ourselves with people who are alike. But actually to disrupt our thinking and open up our minds, we need to sometimes listen to people of a different opinion. This is what the format Real Talk is about. We have given the stage and the microphone to a number of non-corporate voices, different perspectives that can hopefully help us disrupt our thinking. The first real talker is Korina Emmerich. She's an artist and a designer based in New York. Korina, the floor is yours.
Indigenous people make up 4% of the population of the world, yet we are protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. This is not a heroic statistic. It is loaded and violent. When I was initially contacted to share a message as a part of this summit, I was taken aback and wondered what role I am filling in the summit's grasp for inclusivity. But as someone who has been passed down the responsibility to be a protector of our lands, this is an opportunity for me to step forward and call for accountability. We've created a white supremacist-centered industry built on the backs of people who have very few rights, very poor working conditions, and unfair pay. Our excessive demand to buy things cheap comes at a human cost. The name of the summit was changed from Redesigning Growth to Redesigning Value, because growth is an inherently unsustainable practice. So how do we create genuine value? It's not simply about products anymore, it's about the stories and the people behind them. As designers, we are storytellers. Our words and actions hold power, and we have to create a standard of value for every creation, every person, every word, and every action that we take. For me, getting down to the root of my presence as a being and what and how I contribute to this world is my form of radical sustainability. But my commitment does not stop there. I believe in the sustainable representation of Indigenous people in all arenas. As Indigenous people, we are stewards of the land, and we have a responsibility to uphold that commitment. While the fashion industry has now started adopting the concept of circularity in response to the demonstrative effects of industry and colonization, credit needs to be placed where credit is due. Circularity is an inherently Indigenous concept that has existed since time immemorial. It is not a new idea, and it certainly should not be our next buzzword. In an industry that is currently more focused on the commodification of diversity rather than giving up your seat at the table, I am here to demand that we start listening to each other with respect and gratitude. Inclusivity is not a trend, it is an action. In the authentic global sustainability movement, we are innately aware of the need to diversify the spaces we occupy, to take actionable steps to amplify the voices of Black and Brown people, the original stewards of the land, in order to work towards restorative and regenerative solutions. Now is the time for us to start dismantling the systems of oppression built up around us, and to start working together to create radical change within this industry. This is the only way to move forward and to truly create lasting value.
There would be no fashion industry if it wasn't for beautifully designed products. And I would actually also argue that there would be no sustainable fashion industry if it didn't come down to beautiful products. Do I love it? Will I look good in it? Is it sustainably made? Those things are connected. This is why I'm super excited to present to you this next piece of content that we've created. It's called Designer Challenge. We have chosen 3 of the most exciting designers of our time and challenged them to produce a sustainable product. I am very proud to present the first Designer Challenge with the awesome New York-based designer, Heron Preston.
This is like filming radio for the first time. Right? I didn't know what to do with the technology, so I was like, oh, can you do an Air Force One? You know, but like you can obviously do so much more. My name is Heron Preston. I'm a designer, I DJ, I love to play music, creative director. It's just all around vibes. So cool, so cool. He had like this piece of printout paper in the box when I opened it up, and it said something like, I made a video for you, and it had a big QR code. I open my camera, the link pops up, I hit the link, it takes me straight to YouTube, and a 3-minute video starts playing of Cornelius saying, "Hey Heron!" "Hi Heron!" Oh my God, this kid is next level. The secondhand first philosophy, which was all about upcycling and, you know, recovering what would normally be wasted and giving it a second life. All with a kind of a mission of never sending, you know, waste to landfills by the year 2030. And it also introduces a whole bunch of new people to the playing field that haven't necessarily been involved in fashion before. Kind of just goes back to me being in like high school and being friends with like the skaters, but then like the nerds, but then like the cowboys who drove like the 4-wheelers, you know, and I was that skater kid. But I wanted to kind of just be friends with like everyone. And then as I started to get older, I started figuring out ways to kind of like see parallels in all of that. So kind of having like Daniel as like the footwear like designer and like historian, and then like Cornelius's technology, and then like my vision and like, you know, my kind of like passion to push my brand to the forefront of like culture, and, you know, having these breakthroughs kind of like, I felt like that was like the perfect like triangle of like, you know, strength. Triangles are really strong forms, you know? We were like, all right, let's do a launch together. Let's introduce a sneaker to the world. I did a Skype Zoom with Cornelius. How many have you guys built so far?
We only have one right now.
Just how he spoke to me, I felt like I was speaking to like Steve Jobs. Kind of version 1 and version 2 changed a lot.
More or less minor changes.
Dude, like the next fucking like genius that the world will know. Like I knew I was speaking to a genius, but I was like, man, the world is gonna fucking know this genius pretty soon. Like I want to be involved. Conversation after conversation. He just started taking me through his studio and really started introducing me to his process and his philosophy of getting a 3D printed shoe on the foot of every person around the world. And then when that shoe may break down or they no longer want it, they can send it back, break down that material, and then use that material to reprint another shoe and send it back to you. So you technically only own one pair of shoes. And then the cost, you know, really, really cheap because of the materials. And so I was just so impressed with just his whole thinking and how future he was thinking. I just knew that like, he would be like the perfect partner to help me write the next chapter in my journey in like sustainability and like really kind of exploring and pushing the boundaries of like what's possible in fashion. I hope kind of people get so inspired from these philosophies and these new ideas that they go off and apply.
A Copenhagen Fashion Summit classic is the one-on-one conversation and interview on stage. But given the times we're in, we couldn't bring people together. So we had to think of a new way of bringing some of these exciting voices into a conversation. So this is how Samantha Patterson, the CEO of Red Carpet Green Dress, met with Omoyemi Akaili, who is the founder of Lagos Fashion Week, for an in-depth conversation at the Conduit in London. It's a perfect place for two such trailblazing female leaders for a conversation about privilege, value, social justice, and connecting with the African continent. You can watch a highlight of their in-depth conversation here, but also a full link that you can find on our website.
Oh, Yemi, we finally get to
I
meet.
know, right?
I can't believe we've not crossed paths before. This makes no sense.
It's really great meeting you.
You too.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. I've always felt that something was missing in terms of I didn't feel like I was doing better for more than myself. I wanted to be part of something that did better for the environment, for communities. And when I happened into sustainable fashion, because it was an accident, I found that that's what I needed that was missing, being part of something that looked at global communities, that looked at the earth, that looked at the impact beyond making something that was beautiful.
How do we ensure that we create that balance, that mindful balance between the people, the processes, and the environment to get people to understand that, you know, it's not always about the bottom line. It's not always about, you know, how much money can we make? You know, sometimes, you know, we have to ask ourselves or tell ourselves, when is enough enough? You know, and I don't really think it's about not making money. It's about making sure that every hand profits.
And what you've built with Lagos Fashion Week, but also then your agency, which kind of, like you said, is like an incubator for brands and to help them scale themselves up.
The last 3 or 4 years, 4.5 years, it's sort of changed to how can we rebuild our own ecosystem to be able to support our own designers, to be able to ensure there's infrastructure that can, you know, help them grow, scale up, and, you know, provide everything that they hopefully need. That's who we are. Tell me about you. I mean, it's so glamorous. Sounds, you know, when you hear red carpet, green dress, I'm like, girl. The
core for us is just redefining how sustainability is seen and educating people to be aware that it's a culturally dynamic conversation. Sustainability in the United Kingdom is not the same as sustainability in Ghana. And actually, FYI, the Ghanaian sustainability could potentially teach the Western sustainability a great deal. There's an exchange happening. But right now it does feel like it's a certain part of the world saying this is how to be sustainable.
So it's quite interesting as well that in Nigeria and so many parts of Africa, the way the designers work, it's naturally adapted or suited. It's what you call slow fashion anyway. You know, with the craftsmanship and the communities and all. But we realized that it was important for us to be deliberate about teaching and impacting the next generations.
When when we're talking about the presence of Black people, people of colour, is staggeringly low compared to their white counterparts. So our presence in this industry is we're underrepresented in this industry. If you take a fashion brand that's offering an internship, but it's an unpaid internship, that means that anybody who doesn't have the disposable income or is not from a socioeconomic group where they can afford to do an internship that's unpaid means that they will automatically be declined that opportunity or won't be able to apply for that opportunity because they can't support themselves. They just can't. So then you start unpacking how wealth is distributed within the industry or how wealth is distributed within society, and you'll start seeing very strange and striking similarities.
How effective is every company now, every major, every other company is, creating or employing a diversity chief, an inclusivity this, all of that, I call it the scramble and petition for getting a person of color on board. Grab one quick and, let the person be the face of, so how effective is that? Do you really think it's going to change anything? Do they have the power, or is just, another act of tokenism?
Yes, there was an element where people are reacting and saying, well, we need to appoint somebody, and I almost feel like that's just the wrong way to go about this. You don't actually need to do this token knee-jerk reaction. Actually do the deep work of auditing your company, researching your company, interviewing your employees. Do something that's a bit more thought through versus reactionary.
Do you think, is it possible that some people are really completely oblivious to what's that they're in positions of privilege? Like, do you really think that they're not aware that, wow, okay, I'm here today because of XYZ?
I think that being oblivious is a privilege.
Girl.
I think that being able to be oblivious to something is a privilege. To be able to say, oh, I didn't realise that there were no other... Oh my goodness, I didn't realise I was the only... That's a privilege because in our
in this whole store, we only have 3 Black
my
brands.
Goodness, what a shocker. Did you know that? To be able to have that reaction is a privilege because for many of us, we are acutely aware that we are the only one. We are acutely aware because we are the only one. And we carry such a responsibility to do not only our job well, but to represent others who are not in that room with us. So it's a privilege to be oblivious in 2020. It really is.
Where we're coming from, fashion really can save lives. Fashion can change lives. Coming from a country where, the poverty line is people live below less than $1 a day, coming from a country where the unemployment rate is probably in double digits, getting people to understand that, when you see the product, that's not just where the work starts. You have to pause for a minute to figure out, how the process was.
We're wasting at such an astronomical scale. And I think that whole idea of what we value as often only being the finished product and everything that goes into that almost suddenly becomes valueless once the product's finished. And it's this whole idea that, well, waste is only waste if you waste it.
So value doesn't end with the wearer, with the first, first person who comes in contact with it. It's that product that can, for as long as it's in existence, really, either in its pure state or in the state in which it becomes repurposed or recycled, it would always bring value to the wearer. We recently had a project called Woven Threads as part of Lagos Fashion Week. And actually the same designer, This Is Us, came up with a video. What does it mean to design like an African? It means to be able to design and create for a very long time.
Right.
And that's what value means. Creating something out of nothing, but can last for as long as possible.
I've been into fashion since I was 12 years old, and a girl kissed me because I dressed nicely. I realized that was the most important communication for me.
I like working in fashion because it brings together the creative, the analytic, and a lot of different people.
I love beautiful clothes and the craft of fashion.
I'm passionate about working in fashion because we all wear clothes every single day. And for me, it's about connecting the dots between the clothes we wear and Earth's communities.
Used in the right hands, in the right way, I believe that fashion can be a powerful tool for positive change.
I love working with fashion because creativity is woven into the DNA.
You see it every season on the catwalk, and that spirit of innovation is exactly what our planet needs in this turnaround decade.
I believe that the fashion industry is a very big platform through which we can change the future for millions of producers.
I think fashion is all about people, and always about people.
I'm passionate about the fashion industry because it is that spark that can ignite change in the world. The industry employs some 300 million people. Its impact can be felt in countries and continents like Africa, where women and young people do not have jobs.
I am proud to work in the fashion industry because we help change how people view themselves and how they communicate to the outside world.
Don't you just love new? A new day, a newborn baby, or a brand new shirt? Fashion as an industry has always centered itself around a never-ending desire for newness. It's common across some of the industry's biggest brands to release as much as 52 new collections every year, which is evidence of a deeply ingrained logic towards growth as the only viable method of defining success. The fashion industry is already one of the largest and most resource-intensive industries in the world, and global garment production is expected to continue to increase its volume at a pace where sustainability improvements are not catching up. So how can the fashion industry redesign its value proposition to benefit a triple bottom line of both people, planet, and profit? In 2005, the average consumer kept their clothes twice as long as we do today. But over the last 20 years, the price of clothes has decreased by 30%, and we buy 60% more. The result is that for every 5 garments produced, 3 end up as garbage within a year. We believe fashion can do better, and we must find new opportunities for both sustainability and a more prosperous business. It's time for a new way of thinking. So here are 3 ideas to get the creative juices flowing. Idea number 1, redesign the purpose of your company. How do you create value? Are there other ways to measure value? Can you slow down the pace of production without losing important stakeholders? Idea number 2, boost for demand. Wouldn't it make sense to stop making clothes that will never be sold at full price or never be sold at all? Is it possible to reduce the number of fashion seasons and drops? Can you use new technology to match supply and demand better? Idea number 3, try on a new business model. Why sell your clothes only once if you can sell the same shirt 5 times? Why not make clothes of excellent quality that can be resold, remade, or leased? And why not build more long-lasting customer and supply chain relationships? Why not ask yourself these questions? Because if you can find a way to redesign value, it will not only reflect positively on your business, but on the fashion industry as a whole. Now that would be new and exciting.
I believe fashion is our global language, meaning whoever you are, wherever you're from, you can communicate about your values based on what you're wearing.
I love fashion because it's art and it's creative and beautiful, and I want to be a part of creating fashion that is not only beautiful and creative, but also political and empowering to everyone involved with its making.
What's so exciting about working in fashion right now is that this particular cultural moment, it's all about the creative use of resources.
I think fashion is a practical art that everyone can be a part of, which means that everyone can be a part of the change too.
Fashion is powerful. It sits at this cool intersection of art, design, utility, and psychology, and it really serves as a reflection of our society. Fashion makes me feel alive. It is my armor, my confidant, and my one true love. I don't see myself pursuing anything outside of fashion. Sustainable and ethical fashion is the only way to follow that passion of mine.
Because it can be so much magic. It can be so empowering and so powerful as a vehicle for change. So yeah, I think that's it.
The topical headline for CFS Plus is Redesigning Value, and within that a discussion also about growth and prosperity. My next guest has posed a question: why can't fashion respect the non-negotiable planetary boundaries? I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Kate Fletcher. Hi, Kate. Good to see you.
Hi, Ava. Yes, really delighted to be here.
So in the fall, before the COVID hit us, you launched a report called Earth Logic. So can you unfold a little bit what Earth Logic is all about?
Absolutely. So what Earth Logic is, it's a radical invitation to business leaders, to governance, to designers, to the media, to citizens, to put Earth first and to transform the fashion sector. We think, Matilda, Tam and I, my co-conspirator and long-time collaborator who wrote Earth Logic, we think that it's urgent that we begin to deal with things within the fashion sector differently. And this is because of the scale of the problem that we face. And actually also because the primary obstacle to delivering change at scale and at pace is growth logic, is the logic of economic growth. We have to work at the level of the system and the paradigm. So this means not only working with materials or supply chain issues, but also asking the questions that are about the goal and the purpose of the system that we're working in. So what Matilda and I propose within Earth Logic is that we substitute growth logic, which up to this point has been the purpose of the paradigm that we're working in, with Earth Logic instead. And that we put Earth and thriving of all its peoples first.
Fashion industry, for instance, is a big driver for growth and development in countries, for something that also, lifts humans out of poverty and so on. So how do we balance that with this notion of degrowing or producing less stuff, or creating less of that traditional growth?
If you look in ecological systems, what you see that an organism will grow within its niche until it's fulfilled the size of its niche, and then it stops growing, and then it switches into a new system, a system of maintenance of its size. It doesn't try to grow any further. And so one of the things that we see is that we have to begin to understand that there's lots of different strategies and stages within different economies that we need to sustain at the same time.
I just keep thinking, how do we put that into real life? We have companies who either have different owners that wants to be prosperous, or we have shareholders investing in the bigger companies that also pursue sort of a growth margin. We have countries who are trying to lift their population out of poverty by growing, in manufacturing, for instance, or so on. How do we tell all these people to sort of halt, or enough is enough?
Well, plainly, it's not the most easy conversation to begin, but it's one that we need to pursue. We need to talk frankly and respectfully, and we need to bring in lots of different people into the conversation. I think one of the things that happens often is that we just talk to people sort of a bit like us, people who reflect the same perspective, and it's obviously vital that we don't just do that, and that we begin together to develop or uncover or find old methods and ideas around thinking about what success could be like if it wasn't measured in growth format. Perhaps we can even think about how corporations can maybe define a living purpose for business.
So what would be your advice to CEOs and politicians listening in? What should they implement rather today than tomorrow?
I think a shift from a system which is not so much concerned with accumulation as towards the maintenance of what we already have provide loads of really exciting business opportunities.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking time.
All right, no worries.
Redesigning value is to create new purpose.
Innovation.
Purpose. A moral upgrade.
Impact.
Compassion. Better.
Capitalism.
Dignity. Redesigning value means respectful practices that drive progress end to end for all.
I think about redesigning value as something that has no sell-by date and something that is never off-season, out of season, and is always timeless.
The first word that comes to mind in redesigning value is holistic. We need value to encompass not just profits, losses, products, but also impacts on people and the planet.
Hope.
Workers.
Solidarity.
A new beginning.
Inclusion.
I think redesigning value is also redistribution of value following the principles of equity.
People and planet working together as an ecosystem.
In order for our industry to make the changes it needs, we need to reimagine the entire value chain. And this is going to take deep systemic changes in everything we do.
Change. Sustainable development.
Ethics and aesthetics.
For me, it's not about redesigning value. It's about bringing the values that I learned growing up in Uruguay in a remote place and applying those values of long-term view and sustainability into the work I do.
Longevity.
Circularity.
Change.
New perspectives.
Reimagine, reinvent, and rebalance.
Often in life, a straight line from A to B is the most efficient and desirable route. But when it comes to fashion, this is not necessarily true. At least not when it comes to the life of a piece of clothing. Let's say that A is a crisp new white shirt, and B is the landfill where it will eventually end up. Then it's better if the shirt's way there is as long and winding as possible. Or even better, that A doesn't lead to B at all, but ends up circling back to A again. Right now, up to $500 billion of value is lost every year because used clothes are not recycled, resold, or repurposed properly. Instead, large amounts of new resources are used to produce clothes that are often only used for a short period of time before they're turned into garbage and lost forever. This repeated movement of our planet's resources from A to B pollutes and degrades our natural environment and its ecosystems. So how do we introduce a larger degree of circularity in the fashion industry? As it is now in the current linear economy, fashion is not only harming the environment, but profit is also spilling from the gaps in the life cycle of a piece of clothing. The best possible solution would be to close the loop entirely by eliminating the need for virgin fibers and circulate fashion products back into the loop as raw materials for new products. Actually, research shows that shifting to a circular economy could unlock $4.5 trillion in global economic growth, a number that makes your head spin. We're not quite there yet, but important strides are being taken to empower consumers and enable them to dispose of their used clothes in a more sustainable fashion. Global materials science company Avery Dennison has come up with a clever concept that is referred to as a reverse care label. Using a smartphone, consumers can scan the reverse care label on a piece of clothing and immediately identify the easiest and best way to resell, reuse, or responsibly dispose of the garment. This ensures that the valuable textile resources in their garments are reused and sent back to the beginning of the supply chain. Most consumers are already familiar with the small label inside our clothes that helps us wash at the right temperature or stops us from washing clothes that shouldn't be washed at all. So by adding an extra interactive piece of information to this well-known place, Avery Dennison enables the industry to make recycling information accessible at that crucial moment, when we're ready to say goodbye to our no longer so crisp or white shirt. The circle is closed, and our beloved shirt can return as a new shirt, ready for another life cycle.
Circularity will take the fashion industry all the way. Without circularity, there is no foundation for sustainability.
I think circularity is the future.
It does have its limitations, and I think it's not the cure of fast fashion.
It can go far, however, we need to focus on changing people's mindsets.
I think circularity is the most practical solution we have. It shouldn't be easier to make a new polyester t-shirt by mining petroleum.
Circularity is going to take us to rely less in virgin material, and I think that's one of the dreams that we cannot wait to really fulfill. I think circularity with a social agenda can take us very far.
I think that circularity is incredibly influential, but I think that it can put too much of an emphasis on end of life and not optimizing the life of all the products that we make.
Circularity is going to get us part of the way, but not all of the way.
In our Designer Challenge mini-series, I'm excited to present yet another shooting star in fashion, Jide Osifeso. We have challenged him to produce a sustainable product, and we've been following his work process along the way. Enjoy.
I've been responsible for making a lot of product that's maybe gone into landfills, or that's contributed to microplastics that's ended up in the ocean. And I don't want to continue to do that, and I don't want my friends and my colleagues to continue to do that. Hi, I'm jide osifeso, and you're watching Designer Challenge. I like to be minimal, and I like to be impactful with the least amount of elements, time, pieces, products possible. That's how I approach everything. I have my own line called Him, and Him was a concept that I created back in college before I knew how to design. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know how to make the logo. For me, it's the way I go about designing clothing, which is different than it was even a year ago. Right now, society, mankind needs to be really responsible about what we're doing right now. We see what's happening in terms of social justice in the States and across the entire planet. We see the way that we're destroying the environment at an alarming pace. It's okay, I'm gonna make something I would ordinarily make that I think is great, but I don't wanna hurt anybody doing it. I don't wanna hurt any animals. I don't wanna hurt our water. And so it was making a tracksuit that was made out of a completely recycled ocean plastic. So for me, working so long in sportswear, and I continue to make a lot of sportswear, I kind of, went back to figure out okay, what is the environmental impact of what I've been doing all these years? Particularly in sports where you work with a lot of polyester and nylon, but they're extremely harmful to the environment. I met Cyril, who kind of heads up Parley, and we were talking just kind of about design in general and where they wanted to go and what I was working on, and it was kind of a natural process to get to a point where we're we should do something together. And so, amongst other things, I wanted to really work with them after hearing about what they're doing and how they're making fabrics and how the stuff that they're doing with Adidas in terms of recycled microplastics into the actual footwear that they're doing and across all categories. I thought that was just so amazing and remarkable. So I asked them humbly, would you want to do this with me? I'd be, ecstatic to do it. And they were super down to do it. So that's how we kind of started this process. Taking plastic from the ocean and putting it into a garment that ordinarily would be causing a lot of waste is not even a drop in the pan, but it's a step in the right direction theoretically. I try to have fun with every process of like work should be fun because life is boring if it's not. I think I would love to say that a lot of people that I work with are my friends first and foremost, and then we're colleagues secondary. Maybe we can scale that process into a way where we can use that in concerts. We can use that in, your big box retailers where you're buying stuff that's like more affordable than the, the more niche like garments that we're making out of this stuff. But that's the general approach that I have to design in this life, I guess. People that have disposable income and that can afford to make these decisions right now, I encourage them to do it. I try to do it myself. But we need to be able to have that be accessible for all of us worldwide. That's kind of just one aspect of a general responsibility that we all need to undertake and that I've tried my best to do in other aspects of life. So we just generally need to do better as like a race of humans. Like we're just really making a mess.
I think it's important for companies and for individuals in position of being a supervisor to ask themselves a very simple question when they visit the factories that the people who make their clothing work at. You have to ask yourself, how would I feel working there?
As consumers, we need to become more curious and demanding and ask questions like, who made my clothes and under what conditions? Where were they made? Where are the materials sourced from? Can I find more information online?
We need much more transparency along the whole value chain.
We need mandatory transparency as a starting point. Utter visibility throughout the supply chain to encourage a generation that will scrutinize and looking for accountability.
The COVID crisis has shown us how fragile the livelihoods of those who make our clothes are, and how vulnerable they are and dependent on the system.
By keeping the commitment, more transparency, that's all.
I think we need to consider that human hands have touched every piece of clothing that we're wearing. And would any of us really want any of those people to be exploited or harmed in any way as a result of producing something for our own enjoyment?
Principally identifying that people working in this industry have rights, human rights, and industry have obligations, and the governments have also the duty of protect and prevent violations of labor rights.
Only one way, respect. Respect them, respect the people who make clothes for us. I think they do not only need to be mindful, they need respect.
In our series of Real Talks, where we grant the microphone to people who come from a different background and can share different perspectives, the next Real Talk speaker is Nasreen Sheik. She's born in Nepal without knowing her identity or even date of birth, and she ended up in child slavery in the garment industry. She's also a story about empowerment, and I think she will capture your heart. Listen to what she has to say.
I come from an undocumented village near the India and Nepal border where girls are the unacknowledged. From the moment of the birth, the society tells that rural girl children that her existence is insignificant. If one's own birth does not matter, then the condition in which she lives, works, strives, suffers, and dies also do not matter. At an early age, I came to believe as girls we are simply commodities that are bought and traded. As such, we are not human beings. Growing up, I witnessed incomprehensible atrocities against children and women. My life seemed destined for the same oppressive path. I escaped my village for the capital city of Kathmandu, where I immediately was subjected to child slave labor for the textile industry. I was working 12 to 15 hours per day in a sweatshop as a child laborer. I ate, slept, and toiled in a sweatshop workstation, often picking sewing threads out of my food and being too afraid to look out of the window. At the end of each day, I would collapse onto the large bundle of clothes and daydream where they would end up, who would wear them. Some of you wearing those clothes right now. Like all girls in my village, I was not allowed to go to school. My older sister was forced into marriage by age 12, and I was next in line. But through a serendipitous encounter with a kind stranger who provided the only education I ever received, starting with how to read and write, I was able to seize my own destiny. By escaping the sweatshop and forced marriage, around the age of 16, I managed to secure a loan and founded local women's handicrafts, and later Empowerment Collective on a vision to end sweatshop, forced labor, poverty, all with the hope to inspire a movement for ethical fashion in Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. I survived the grueling environment and trauma that came with being a child laborer, and to think there are still over 150 million child laborers working right now pains me more than ever you will know. You must help us stop child labor and sweatshop. Start by asking yourself where your clothes come from. If you work in the fashion industry and you own a business, know your supply chain. We are all humans and we need to look out for each other.
I'm excited that everyone is slowing down and rethinking how they operate.
So I'm really excited about sustainability and circularity concepts becoming the top priority for customers, for brands, and for the policy makers.
A simpler way of life, or a revolution into a simpler way of life.
I'm excited about these supply chains that are disrupted, the people that are in positions of power actually having an opportunity to change things.
The opportunity to start fresh and disrupt the fashion system.
I'm most excited to see how the fashion industry is going to change in terms of slowing down things, in terms of protecting its garment workers from another economic shock such as COVID. And I'm most excited about the Fashion Week calendars that have been redesigned now.
My last guest here at CFS Plus is Bill Faudi. He leads sourcing and development for Target's own brands with a focus on delivering responsible and sustainable products. And I'm particularly curious about how a huge corporation like Target has steered through the COVID crisis and everything else happening in Minneapolis. Hi, Bill. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Eva.
And it's great to see you. And obviously I'm super curious how you have coped with all of this and how Target, as such a big player, has coped with the crisis of the COVID. So can we maybe start there?
For us, is our approach from day one has been a people-first approach. And we literally, sat down in conference rooms to have those conversations about what will be our approach. Is it people? Is it business? What does that look like? And we said, no, it's people. And that's who we are as a company. And so a lot of our focus out of the gates was on ensuring that our team members in the stores were safe, in our distribution centers, and then obviously we were creating the safest shopping environment that we could. We have focused on increasing our minimum wage. So we moved that up to $15 an hour back in July. So yeah, I'd say people first, really kind of focusing on the values and purpose of Target has been our approach to this pandemic.
Has this changed your mindset as a leader? Has the time shifted the way you look at things?
Look at the challenges in some lesser developed countries and the need for our business to operate in an ethical and responsible way, I think has become more apparent now than ever. And so it's literally how we operate. Like I said, it's built into the values and the purpose of this company. But we are more encouraged now to double down our efforts to work collaboratively, to engage with other brands, with other retailers, with other third parties and stakeholders to continue to push forward these efforts. So I'd say the thing that's changed is that it's brought things more to the forefront and accelerated the need for the work that's going on.
Anything that you're optimistic about? I'm
optimistic about the things that we've learned, the lessons that we've learned throughout 2020, which is, certainly not been an enjoyable one for many reasons. I'm excited about the goals we have in place from a carbon footprint standpoint. So we announced about a year ago our goal, our commitment to lower our carbon footprint as a total company by 30% by 2030, based on a 2017 benchmark or baseline. But even more than that, we took it to a next level, right? So we're looking at scope 1 and scope 2, but we also went to scope 3, which encourage others to do. And so that's getting into our supply chain. And so we've also got a public commitment out there that we will
And how's that going?
It's going well. And that commitment is that we'll have 80% of our suppliers by spend also with science-based targets out over the next few years. And so it's going well. We're certainly out of the gates. I can tell you that we have not we've not reached that goal yet, but I'm excited about the things that we've put in place. I'm excited about following through on those.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Absolutely.
This is all I had for you on this first day of CFS Originals. But before we segue into all the live panels, I think we should take a moment to breathe, to think, and reflect on what you just saw. Nike is presenting a mindful moment.
Hey everyone, I'm Brandon Collinsworth, Nike Master Trainer. I'm excited to be a part of your CFS Plus journey, and I've designed the next 10 minutes for us to take a collective breath and recharge together. Most of us have a lot on our mind, sustained over a long period of time. Concerns about our planet, our climate, our health, our community, and our families, and this affects your mental health. The beauty about today's convening is the opportunity to bring us together to focus on collective action. There's power in the collective. All of us here from around the world sharing the same intention to build the future we want for all. Thank you for joining me. Now let's move into the practice. So first and foremost, I want you to just stand up. I want you to connect with the ground, really feel into your body. We're gonna move some energy. We're gonna use our breath to really tap into our intention, and not only that, tap into the moment. It's in the present moment where the real magic happens. So first off, let's go ahead and just really root in your standing position. Hands are down, everything's loose. This first movement pattern that we're gonna infuse in today's practice is called Tai Chi bouncing. So you're just gonna bounce, and you see my fingers, my whole entire body is just moving. What we're doing is moving energy. We're gonna be doing this for 1 minute. So I'm lifting up onto my toes and letting my heels hit the ground. When my heels get the ground, everything reverberates. This is the opportunity to tune back in and really give yourself that care, that we so often forget at times. And next move, you're gonna twist with a little pivot. And this is just waking up the spine, allowing your body and your mind to open up a little bit. And you know what they say, stagnant body, stagnant mind. So as we move here, we're waking up the mind to be receptive to all the magic that you're diving into during this conference. Beautiful. Next one, third one, we call these kneading. So all you're gonna do is start to pat the body, waking up every part of the body, giving every part of the body a little bit of love. You can use the open part of your hand, you can use your fists, moving all the static energy from sitting down, waking up everything. This is your own personal cup of espresso. Or for those who don't drink coffee, yerba mate. So this is also about being curious, exploring. Can you move a little different? Can you move outside of your current movement box and wake things up? Even the head. It's all about energy and then shaking it out. Beautiful. All right. I really want you to root down, root into the heels, super powerful position. Fingers and palms are open towards the front of your room. Shoulder blades pulling down, chest is up and proud, long spine. So what I'm about to teach you right now is the fundamental breath technique for yoga. You lock this in, not only are you gonna go deeper into your yoga practice, but it's a breath technique you can do anytime, anywhere, to automatically bring you back into a state of centeredness and peace. So first technique, first step to breathing properly. I want you to take your left hand, place the two fingers on the bottom of your throat. This is called ujjayi breathing. So a lot of people, when they breathe, they sniff, especially in yoga. That's cold air, that doesn't work. But when you breathe through this technique called ujjayi, this pranayama technique, you pull the air deeper into the throat and it sounds like this. Now, it may feel a little uncomfortable at first, so give it a try a couple times. Pull the air down, and if you're doing it right, you'll actually feel the air flowing over the trachea. Sounds just like this. Second step to breathing properly, to diving into this yoga breath, is I want you to place your left hand on your chest, your right hand on your stomach, all right? Inhaling from above to below, exhaling from below to above. So when you breathe in, chest rises, stomach rises. When you exhale, stomach drops, chest drops. So give that a couple tries. Big inhale. Big exhale. One more time, big inhale. And big exhale. Beautiful. The third fundamental to breathing properly is embodied breathing, wrapping your breath around your movement. So hands are back to the sides where we started. When I say inhale, hands up, you're gonna start your inhale first. So it looks like this. Inhale up. Exhale down. So my breath wraps the movement. Let's try that again. Inhale up. Exhale down. My breath does not end until after my movement stops. So here we go. Let's do a few of these together. Inhale up. Exhale down. Taking it a little deeper. Inhale up. Exhale, forward fold. Inhale all the way up to the sky. Exhale all the way down, sweep the ground. Inhale up. One more. Exhale down. Inhale all the way up. Stay up, lifting through your toes, staying with your breath for 3, 2, 1. Heels come down. Exhale, hands to heart center. Close your eyes, tune in, and just feel through awareness. Tune into what you're feeling. Noticing, observing. And it's here that I want you to set an intention. Set an intention for yourself. Set an intention for this conference. Set an intention for what you want to see change in the world. And breathe into that. Breathe into that space. Breathe into that power. Breathe into that vision. Eyes are still closed. I want you to take your left hand, place it over your chest, right hand on your belly. These are two powerful symbolic centers. The right hand sitting over the belly button is symbolic to willpower, also known as Manipura chakra. This is the seat of power. And the left hand sitting over the heart, Anahata, the seat of compassion. So when we merge the two, our power with our heart and our heart with our power, the real transformation happens. So breathing into these two centers with your intention, with your breath, and really feeling in to what it is you want to bring to life, what it is you intend to bring to life. Two more deep breaths. How do you want to shift this world forward? What impact do you want to make? What legacy do you want to leave? From here, slowly begin to open the eyes. Hands come down to your sides. Welcome back. Thank you for practicing with me. This is day 1. Set a powerful intention and remember to take care of yourself. Health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. I'm Nike Master Trainer Brandon Collinsworth. Namaste.
I'm excited to kick off now the next part of CFS Plus, the live panels, workshops, and case studies that you can listen into and take part in. This first live panel is delivered by the Fashion Pact. It's a coalition that was actually inaugurated here on this stage at Copenhagen Fashion Summit in 2019 by caring CEO François-Henri Pinault. He has rallied the industry that now represents 1/3 of the world's shoes and apparel behind an ambition to change biodiversity, oceans, and climate. A big roar to hear their first one-year status report.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. It is being live streamed. I'm Anita Rajpal. This conversation is also being recorded, and you'll be able to enjoy it at a time that is convenient for you. Please also do join us in this conversation by sending us your questions, which we will hopefully be able to read out and engage our panel discussion, our panelists in this conversation as well. But for now, again, I'm Anita Rajpal. I welcome you all to this live stream. On August 26, 2019, heads of state attending the G7 summit in Biarritz, France, heard a call to action. It was from the leaders of a major global industry announcing a promise. They made a pact to work together towards concrete and specific goals when it comes to reducing the impact that their industry was having on our planet. They made a promise to do what they could to reduce the harm that was being done to our planet. The areas they focused on was climate change, biodiversity, and oceans. But in 2019, the world was a very different place. 2020 has seen the world shut down. Now, for some, it was a blessing in disguise. It was time to be still, reflect, and to stop. And we saw the impact of that stillness on our planet, the world around us, and the environment, with clearer skies, with animals emerging out into the open, sensing this peace that perhaps had been missing throughout the age of the Anthropocene. But for many others, 2020 has been a curse, losing livelihoods, losing the loves of their lives in a battle no one was prepared for. Over 1 million people to date have so far died from COVID-related illnesses around the world, and that number continues to rise every day. What has become blatantly clear in this year is that who we are, what we do, how we act, where we live, how we earn, how we treat each other and the planet, it's all interconnected. So as we look at this progress report from the Fashion Pact, we do so with understanding that 2020 is a game changer, because it has to be. Our panel today consists of 4 esteemed leaders who are speaking not as a voice for their companies, but they are representing the 62 signatories who are part of this Fashion Pact, a collective voice by CEOs for CEOs. Before I introduce you to them officially and welcome them officially, take a look at this video.
The fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. There has been a lot of talk, but I think now is the time to take into account really the impact and the need for sustainability in our society today.
We joined the Fashion Pact as it is our strong belief that the collective action is much more powerful than the action of each single individually.
That's why in a team sport, you achieve much better results.
The Fashion Pact is breaking down barriers of competition and bringing together companies, distributors, and suppliers to work together toward clear common goals.
CEO to CEO, principles to take tough decisions and fast decisions to make sure things are moving forward more rapidly.
It has been able to gather industry leaders to actually make fashion differently.
The beneficiaries are therefore all living beings and the planet itself, with maximum benefit to each.
I'd say solidarity.
Cooperation.
Impact.
Essential.
Focus.
The power of all.
Action. It's really now time for action.
Together, let's make every act count.
Joining me today is Sonia Singhal, Chief Executive Officer of Gap Inc., Manny Chirico, Chairman and CEO of PVH Group, its owner of iconic brands such as Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, Bruna Pavlovsky, the President of Chanel SAS and President of Chanel Fashion, and Paul Polman, the co-founder and chair of Imagine, a for-benefit organization and foundation. It's a new type of business collaboration working with CEOs to help business leaders create the world we all want. I'd like to welcome all of you today. Paul, I'd like to begin with you. You have said before that what is really needed today is courageous business leaders taking action. That couldn't ring truer today. Since the creation of the Fashion Pact, what do you believe has been accomplished, and how do you measure that accomplishment based on the events around the world today?
Well, thank you, Anita, and welcome to my fellow panel members, Bruno, Manny, and Sonia. It's an honor to be here. What is very clear is that COVID has shown us that we cannot have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. And the relationships between climate change, biodiversity, human health, now also a racial dimension, the economy are increasingly being clear. And what this is really is understanding that the private sector has to step up to ensure that we come out of COVID better than what we went in. 90% of the people of this world don't want to move back to the world that we came from, but want to create a greener, more sustainable, more equitable environment. The reality is that CEOs themselves in their companies can only do so much for which they are held accountable, but collectively they can do much more. So the Fashion Pact is a collective of courageous CEOs that have come together across the value chain to work on areas to create tipping points beyond existing initiatives. When they're together, they become more courageous, and we see bigger initiatives. In this case, around the areas, as you mentioned, of biodiversity, of climate, and of oceans. And what we have achieved is an industry that was relatively independent, has now a coalition of 62 companies. 80% have now made commitments on biodiversity. 40% is already working on science-based targets. And when it gets to plastics, everybody has accelerated their commitments in the last year. So it is these type of coalitions that keep us more ambitious and keep us driving forward at the scale and speed that is needed. And this is achieved within the last 12 months, as you rightfully pointed out, despite COVID.
Well, let's go deeper now into those three pillars. You know, when it comes to climate change, in a report co-sponsored and co-authored by the Global Fashion Agenda, which was released in August of this year, it said that, and I'm quoting here, that the fashion sector was responsible for some 2.1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2018. That's about 4% of the global total. And they put this in context, and they say that the fashion industry emits about the same quantity of GHGs per year as the entire economies of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. Now, in order to meet the target of keeping global rising temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius, this report indicates, says that the industry would need to cut its GHG emissions by 1.1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide in less than a decade now. So, Manny, let me ask you, what has the Fashion Pact already done to begin offsetting this fast approaching and already evidentiary existence of our Earth's limitations?
Thank you, Manita. In recognition of the urgent need to reduce emissions as an industry overall, the Pact has established 3 action items. Action item number 1 is an alignment with the existing UN Fashion Charter on climate change, which sets the bar for driving corporate actions that are consistent with achieving net zero emissions by 2050 through the implementation of science-based targets and also reducing emissions by 30%. Action item number 2 is achieving 25% sourcing of low-impact raw materials by 2025. And action item number 3 is achieving a 50% use of renewable energy by 2025 across all of our operations and 100% by 2030. In order to deliver on these targets, the Fashion Pact is engaging with key experts in the area, in the industry, including the consulting firms System IQ and 2050, who've mapped out strategic areas for our collective efforts and will provide us with assistance in the accurate reporting of our results and target setting. So far, within most companies, significant individual action is already underway to reduce greenhouse emissions. Members achieved significant progress towards the transition to lower climate impact raw materials, specifically a 40% in cotton, as well as targets that are set up that a third of our companies are on track to achieve 50% renewable energy in 2020. It's the early stages of our efforts, but I think we're off to a very good start so far.
Now, in a report released today, 1/5 of the world's countries are at risk of their ecosystems collapsing due to a decline in biodiversity. And also a UN report that was released earlier this year, that was published in May, found that around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. We understand, though, that the loss of biodiversity is not only an environmental issue, it is a developmental, economic, societal, security, and moral issue as well. So, Bruno, when it comes to biodiversity, what has the Fashion Pact been doing there?
Thank you, Monita. Hello, everybody. Just before going to biodiversity, I would like to some remarks. The first one is about the Fashion Pact. I have had a lot of questions about how do that possible, you know, to have these 60 companies, who are sometimes competitors working together. And I think that the topics we are addressing with the Fashion Pact through biodiversity, but through all the topics, is much larger than the competition. Here we are talking at the early beginning of the chain, when the competition is less and when we need to make the changes happen. So first one, no competition, only focus on the key topics. Second one, I heard a lot about compensation. We are not talking here only about compensation. We are talking on very concrete action plan. And I will take an example with cotton, just to highlight how we can work together on these topics and try to make things change. Here, we are talking about very concrete action to change the planet. The third one, for all of us and for everyone, it's a new responsibility. When I take the example of Chanel, we want to be the ultimate luxury. We want to represent the excellence of tomorrow. We are working on creation, we are working on craftsmanship, know-how, and we need also to work with the best raw materials. It's not only the best quality, but the best way to find these raw materials and to ensure that the way to cultivate them, to create them, is clean, if I may say, with the planet of today. And that's something very concrete that we need to tackle. My example, the cotton, you mentioned a few figures. It's about 40% of all the materials used by the signatories of the Fashion Pact. It's about 1/3 of the cotton used in the fashion market. So it's very clear it was a fundamental element we need to improve if we want to cover the topics of biodiversity. When we talk about cotton, we talk about 3 major risks. One is obviously the labor condition, one is the water consumption, and the third one is the chemical usage. If we want to provide a change, if we want to make things happen, we cannot stay at this level isolated. We have to work together with the best experts, and one of the contributions of the Fashion Pact, obviously, is to bring at the table the best experts to understand, all together, which are the right challenges and improve the different level of certification that you can find on the cottons. And here, we need not only to have all these participants, but to convince them to become quite active in the change. For Chanel, for example, we have decided to focus on the regenerative organic certified cotton because we have found there the best balance between what we need in terms of brand and the changes that we want to apply, I think it's a very good example to try to convince all the others to do the same at their level, at their speed, with their choice. For me, in these topics, the Fashion Pact, it's an accelerator. On top of cottons, we have been able to talk on many different materials, and there is a long list. We need to focus and we need to improve. And that's the job at my level of the Fashion Pact.
Now, when it comes to oceans, Sir David Attenborough has said that the world's oceans are turning into a toxic soup of industrial waste and plastic, and it has been reported that textiles are among the largest sources of both primary and secondary waste in our oceans. With that, Sonia, I'd like to ask you, how has the Fashion Pact identified and progressed on targets that are crucial to not just cleaning up the messes that's already been made, but not adding to the mess that's in our oceans right now?
Thank you, Manita. And let me start by acknowledging, this is a big challenge. And part of the benefit of the Fashion Pact is facing some of these big challenges head on with transparency. So let's start by stating the problem. We know that there's unnecessary and problematic plastics that pollute the oceans, damage our ecosystems, affect our food, water supply, and even impact the air that we breathe. And so in order to protect our oceans, our big systems change is required. And this is, as others have said, we realize we're all connected in this, and we must take bold collective action as an industry to address this microfiber pollution and other impacts that the apparel industry has that directly affect our ocean. None of us, no matter our size, can solve this alone because we're all connected on one planet. So what the Pact has done, to start, we've identified two key action items for the ocean pillar. The first is to eliminate the unnecessary and problematic plastics. And the second is to use only 100% of recycled plastic by 2030. And as we shared in the report published today, so far, 60% of the signatory brands have eliminated plastic packaging in their retail bags. And while signatories continue to work through the challenges in hangars and business-to-business transport bags, to date, I'm really proud to say that 15% of our signatories have achieved elimination of unnecessary plastics. So in our first year, that's fairly sizable progress, and we intend to continue to publish these kinds of numbers in our reporting go forward. And I can speak for my own company that scales with a lot of our product around the world, and for us, putting our arms around the actual impact, the actual numbers was the first step. And then in the first year to get to that double-digit elimination, it feels like progress, yet we have a long way to go.
Now, Maddie, you've said throughout your leadership that you are committed to and focusing on science-based targets. How then do you measure any success that has come your way and within the Fashion Pact itself?
I think given my background, I'm a financial and operational background. To me, everything needs to be measured if you're going to have success. And I think it's critical and an essential part of demonstrating that we are serious about what we're undertaking, and this is not just public relations, that we're setting targets that are based on science and that we're holding ourselves accountable to deliver against those targets. It's also critical that those targets are, well, Paul Pullman likes to use the word courageous, that we are stretching ourselves on those targets and keep moving forward to try and achieve those or exceed those targets as we go forward. And it's critical that we report the status of how we're doing against those targets continually as we go forward to see, are we achieving, are we improving, are we raising the bar for our industry and for the pact that we're working together. So I think it really needs to be tangible, results-oriented targets that we establish, and then having a reporting framework that's consistent throughout the industry and consistent how we measure, that pulls it all together and allows us to report our results in a way that's clear to the consumer, clear to all of our stakeholders as we go forward, and that we're holding ourselves accountable to all those stakeholders as we go forward.
The thing is, with every and any endeavor, there will always be challenges, because if it was easy, we will ask ourselves, why didn't we do it before? This year has certainly tested us all, but goals that were set last year were done so based on science, and they still need to be met. Sonia, you had said before, just earlier, you said that just putting your arms around the numbers was a feat in itself, because it is quite staggering just to simply understand what's at stake here. What have been the hurdles, do you think, Sonia, towards progress, and what do you anticipate those to be in the future?
You know, this year has been such a year unlike any other, Monita, and I think we've all realized not only the impact that we all have on the planet, which we had acknowledged through the origination of the pact a year ago, but truly the impact of the fashion families around the world. And, you know, as we've all lived with the COVID crisis, you know, I think that really was what crystallized for me and for many of us in this industry, when you think about how many families this industry supports. And, you know, if I think about my company alone, between our own employees, but also all of the women that work in our factories, all of the cotton farmers, all of the people that do transportation, it's millions. You know, we tally in the couple of millions. And when you add up all the companies in fashion, the impact is great. So these families that are reliant on the industry for feeding their families, for you know, being at that dinner table and providing, you know, I think it's really come into focus this year. And so for us that have the obligation to guide the industry, we must think about the challenge of sustaining the healthy fashion industry, in addition to the impact and the challenge with meeting and exceeding the goals. And they dovetail very nicely. And I think really it comes down to this simple truth. You know, can we in good conscience know that the workers that work in our industry at night, when they're at the dinner table with their families, can feel good about how we are treating their communities, their planet, you know, their water, their local biology, and at the same time that we continue to push forward with health in the industry. And so the challenge, I think, is great. However, the imperative is even greater because of what it does to livelihoods and families around the world. So that's a little bit how we think about it. And I think it gives us the energy and the criticality to move forward with, you know, aggressive goals on multiple fronts in this topic.
The Fashion Pact has a diverse membership. Paul, are there differences of involvement or diversity of issues according to the market segments that these companies represent? Paul, I think you're on mute there. Could you unmute?
I apologize.
There you go. Great, thanks.
Sonia and Mani said it well. We don't compete on the future of humanity. And what you see here is the biggest collective industry coalition across any industry that we as Imagine are involved with. We work in the food sector, we work in the finance sector, and we work here in fashion. And having 62 companies together, you see the benefit of first and foremost sharing their best practices with each other and then driving to the highest common denominator. Now, the key here is that you have the total value chain, because the issues might be, as Sonia said, labor standards up the value chain, whilst the innovations might happen down the value chain. The luxury companies are in a better position to innovate around sustainability, try new things and set trends than, for example, the mass of the market. So having everybody together and benefit from that collective higher ambition as well as best practices is absolutely crucial. What we now need is we have about 30% of the whole market, enough to have a tipping point. We have governments that have come to us, NGOs who want to work with us, innovation incubators that think that they can scale collectively with us. So we are starting to see the advantages of doing this and driving the systems change that is needed. What we now would recommend is that the companies that are not yet part of the Fashion Pact really seriously consider joining for their own benefit, but also for ensuring that the industry as a whole changes at an accelerated speed. And the world would be so much better for it. The image of the industry would be so much better for it. And the citizens of this world would be so much more grateful for it.
Yeah, collaboration and dedication are key. So Bruno, when we look ahead, what are the next steps then for the Fashion Pact?
So for me, two big parts. The first one, Fashion Pact. I think we need to enlarge and to continue to dig together and to understand new topics. As you know, there are many. Here we talk about some specific examples, the cotton, but there are many others, and we need to learn from this experience. We need to decide what are the next topics. We need to measure and set up the right KPIs to understand where we are. A lot to do to the Fashion Pact, and again, the best experts to help everyone to understand and to find the right positioning. That on one hand. On the other hand, I think it's also the role of the Fashion Pact is to convince all the signatories that change will happen only in their companies. Okay, here we are talking about very concrete action plan, and it's up to each company to decide what are the next steps and how to include and how to make it happen. You know, it's about not only talking about it, it's not only about communicating about it, is how to make it happen, and that it's a big challenge for all of us. On top of that, if I want to take some step back, I think that the best to judge our project and our efforts will be our customers. Today, they touch, they buy, they feel products, and these products have to include, you know, all these new values we are talking about, and that is making a big difference. So for me, being able to invest, you know, in the Fashion Pact, in this transformation, is obviously a way to say that our brands will be still existing in the next 20 years. So it's a key moment, as already mentioned, and we need to be there. We need to be together. We would love to continue to compete, but at the same time, we'll organize these changes, and these changes will give a better planet, if I may say.
Okay. I'd like to now open it up to questions from our audience. We've already got quite a few coming in now. So let's get to it. We've got here from Gaurav. How can we collaborate and have single guidelines for unifying the industry, as there are many coalitions or associations working for reducing the impact through with very diverse estimations? Paul, can I ask you to answer that one for us?
Well, you know, when there are issues in the world, 1,000 flowers bloom. What we're trying to do with this collective is create a bouquet. Because there are so many of these coalitions around climate change, around biodiversity, we usually don't see the step change that we need. We end up with incrementalism. So the beauty of this is that we will have less, bigger, and better initiatives. And with that, we also, as you can see already after 1 year, achieve better results faster. We obviously make it totally transparent. We get the best experts in that help us on defining biodiversity for this industry. Nobody's ever done that, to help these companies accelerate the move to science-based targets on climate change. Over 40 companies now, more than any other industry. And then every year with a scorecard developed by BCG, with a publication of the results and achievements, with the individual members holding each other accountable, we will communicate on the progress and drive the collective higher and higher. This, I believe, is the future of partnership. This is the future of the industry, and hopefully we'll have more companies join soon as well.
We have a question here for you, Bruno. The question is from Fulia. Chanel has been undertaking a series of acquisitions along their supply chain with small businesses. How are these transactions sitting within the company's sustainability policy?
Yeah, I think all these acquisitions are key for the company for the next 20 years. We are not talking about today. But quite often we are talking about creation, we are talking about unique know-how. More and more difficult to ensure that all this know-how can continue to exist. So here, we are giving to this small company the opportunity to continue to develop, to continue to work with all the partners. So I'm not talking only one brand. Chanel is, if I may say, an open business. And the idea for us is that if we want to continue to be as strong in the next 20 years, we need to ensure that all these people, not only in France, in Italy, but around the world, can continue to exist and can continue to bring their know-how to what we need.
Okay. Sonia, I've got a question here for you. It's from Christian asking, why wait until 2030 to implement these changes? SpaceX launched a rocket into space in as little as 10 years. Could Gap Inc. not eliminate plastic in a much shorter time than that?
No, I love the challenge, and I think as we publish our annual sustainability report, these are the challenges that we pose to ourselves as well, because we all want to get there as fast as we can. We really do. And so for us, I would say that we're committed to 2030, and we're looking for every opportunity to pull ahead. And we've got a very passionate employee team and very passionate customers, I think, that will help give us the innovation that is required to make those changes, and we hope to surprise and delight with every year's progress.
Paul, I have a question here for you. It's from Beata. How does the Fashion Pact control and enforce what has been agreed? What are the downsides if targets are not met?
Well, this is a collective of courageous CEOs that has decided to accelerate their company plans. And even despite COVID, in the first year, I think they've put their word where their mouth is, and that's very encouraging. The strength of the Fashion Pact is only as strong as its weakest link. So if there are members that diverge into different directions and are not willing to take these minimal commitments that are needed, one of the absolute commitments, as Sonia is saying, is, for example, to get to the Paris agreements on climate change and to stay below 1.5 degrees. So if companies feel for whatever reason that is not their strategy or that it is difficult to achieve for them, then they will not longer term be part of a collective that tries to drive the industry for the better. But I think that those companies that would follow that route would put themselves at risk. Increasingly, we can see that companies that lead on ESG, that are multi-stakeholder, long-term focused, environmental, social, and governance, are also the ones that are better performing, and actually also the ones that increasingly the financial market is willing to invest in. So everybody would be well advised to be in, because many of the things, if you go out, you really can't achieve versus what a collective can do.
One of the interesting questions, I think one of the things that we have been seeing throughout the year, and as I'd mentioned earlier, and you've all touched upon, is how interconnected we all are, and everything that we do, whatever happens in one side of the planet is felt on the other side. There have been a range of social issues that have been brought to the surface this year and in the last 16, 18 months even, pre-COVID, and obviously within this year of COVID. And those are social issues that are impacting lives, but also our planet in terms of, again, climate change, biodiversity, and oceans. What about the social issues that are, when we look at diversity, inclusivity, Black Lives Matter, gender equality, all of these issues that are extremely important to every company structure? How is the Fashion Pact addressing that? And is that on the agenda, or is that already in the works? I guess, Bruno, would you like to take that one?
What you mentioned, it's a key challenge for all companies. So Fashion Pact is a level of discussion, but not only Fashion Pact. I think that's something that we need to address in each single company. There is no choice. We need to take care of the people who are working for us anywhere. There is no question about that. And that's the reason why we are quite involved on all these changes. But today, as you can see, the situation is specific, if I may say, country per country, and need to be addressed country by country. And that's the reason why, even if we have very high standards for Chanel, I can talk about it, after we have to enter in the detail and the situation can be as needed to be taken into consideration at the higher level of the company.
Manny, how do you ensure that we have 62 signatories right now within the Fashion Pact, how do you ensure that those that are part of this pact are actually staying true to what they promised in the first place?
I think the key is transparency. I think we need to continue to disclose the information that we've said we were going to drive towards, the goals that we've established, the science-based targets, and some of the other targets that we've established for ourselves individually as companies and as part of the collective Fashion Pact together. I think if you think about your stakeholders, our consumers, our employees, and Paul touched on it, now even our stockholders are demanding that we be held accountable and that we deliver on the results that we've talked about in these science-based targets. Just like we are held accountable for our financial results, driving our earnings per share, driving our sales growth, we do that by first and foremost putting ourselves out there, putting goals and objectives out there for each of our companies, and then at the same time driving towards those goals. And do we achieve every goal we're trying to establish? No, but we're moving our companies forward, and we need to do the same thing here with the targets we're setting for ourselves from a biodiversity point of view, from what we see in the environmental issues, and then we've touched on some of the social issues. So all those targets are there, and collectively as an industry holding ourselves accountable for those results, will deliver against that and deliver change.
And while I still have you here, Manny, do you believe, will fashion ever be sustainable? Are these things compatible with each other?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. I think it's critical that we set that as our goal, and we do it in a way that is that has a level of authenticity and integrity to it. That you just don't set goals that sound good from a public relations point of view, but that you can deliver against, that you can measure against, and then you can go and continually show that progress as you go forward. To achieve everything that we want to achieve, we're going to need some technical breakthroughs from a raw material point of view and a processing point of view. I believe the industry is up to those challenges as we move forward, and no one company can do it by themselves. It needs to be something that's done as an industry, that we hold ourselves accountable to do it, and we need to be open to allow other competitors that aren't part of the 62 companies to bring them into the fold, to make them part of the journey as we go forward as well.
It's also an opportunity, isn't it, for smaller companies, those who have the technical know-how, who have that kind of what Prince William was just talking about, those earth shots, moments that we can have. It's an opportunity to create something that we don't know exists yet, or even know how it would exist, but it is possible. Sonia, I have a question here for you. It's from Anna. How can the Fashion Pact tackle the systemic issue of overproduction in the industry, which is surely in itself a significant contributor to environmental degradation, without even going into the issue of overconsumption at the consumer level? That's a really interesting point there.
I think we're seeing the industry shift. All sorts of new business models emerge, whether it is recycling models or circularity or what have you, that are pushing on some of these themes. And certainly it starts with the product right at the beginning, creating the right product at the beginning, all the way through the chain. And then it's really being in support of our customers' needs that are both, I think, emotional needs and physical needs for clothing. So we are paying a lot of attention to the whole value chain. And, quality is, the definition of quality has just shifted. What used to be a quality product now has to be a quality and a sustainable product. And I think with that clarity, the usage and the end use that our customers requires, it will be better served, and that's how we're thinking about it. as well as connecting to all of the evolving business models that'll continue to create this closed loop system between fashion and the planet that has to continue to build and grow.
I think what's an interesting part of any discussion now as we go forward is that I think everyone recognizes the ways things were being done before, they don't work now. And what we need to focus on is, okay, now what can we do to move forward? Bruno, interestingly enough, Chanel has taken numerous initiatives to further reduce its emissions by 50%. There is Chanel Mission 1.5 degrees, as well as investments in innovative companies that give Chanel the opportunities to explore materials that don't extract from nature nor harm nature in the processing cycle. What do you think being part of the Fashion Pact has meant for your company?
I think that all the topics you mentioned, in fact, we have no choice. We are a key moment. If we don't react, if we don't appropriate all these topics, if we are not trying to understand with others, and that's the good news of the Fashion Pact, we are not alone. We are talking together, we are learning from our experience, and again, we have no choice. That's the moment. We have a few years. Few years is perhaps too long, but we have a few years in front of us, and being able to react now, to make this changing now, it's the only way to be able to continue and to save this amazing business, which is fashion. So for me, we have to dare, we have to try to imagine what could be in 20 years from now, this new option. That's the reason why we are investing, but to test, to learn, and let's see what happens. It has been, I believe that the past 2 years have been key in this decision of going ahead. Now we are learning, and it's very important for us. It's very important for our people also.
We have one final question. Paul, I'd like to ask this one for you. Actually, this for you. It's from Vanessa. How do you bring this new mindset of non-competition to such a competitive and conservative industry? She says, I love your words, but I see a lot of difficulty in convincing the industry.
Oh, absolutely. And it will be difficult to convince 100%, Vanessa. We don't disagree with this. But here you've seen some great leaders in the fashion industry today on the panel. What we think is that with about 30 or 40% of the industry present, you can actually create tipping points. The civil society wants to work with you. Governments are getting interested. Technology will be attracted, and it will be so much to the benefit of the companies that are participating. So whilst we realize that ultimately you need to write frameworks or legislation in some of the places, and we're seeing that happening with Europe, with the circular economy packets, for example, or some climate commitments that countries are taking, we believe that we can create a critical mass in every industry. As I mentioned, we're doing it now in food. We're starting to look at it in finance. It's hard work. But I think we're at the point now that we have a good cadre of CEOs that see the importance. One of the examples of this Fashion Pact is also when COVID came, it went immediately together on PPE material, or working like money with PV8 and others, initiated with the ILO, the COVID-19 action in the global garment industry, dealing with the value chain and health and income and job protection. We've never seen these initiatives. So if you put the right people together, we believe you can create these tipping points that the world needs right now. Being incremental or playing not to lose is simply not an option anymore.
Right. On those words, some key words here from this panel discussion: courage, action, no choice, as Bruno had so rightfully said before. I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank my guests, Sonia Singal, Manny Chirico, Bruno Pavlovsky, and Paul Polman. Thank you so much for your words here today and the work that the Fashion Pact is doing. I'd like to thank you all for sending in your questions as well as you join in on this ongoing discussion. I'm Monita Rajpal. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monita.
this next live plenary panel is presented by Laudes Foundation and will address CFS Plus topical headline head-on, redesigning value. They will argue that it's not only just the small tweaks that are needed, but a fundamental shift in our industry to create a new system.
Welcome all, I'm Marina Colerato, and this panel is called Redesigning Value and the Fashion Industry. So you know, this session will be recorded and will be available on YouTube if you want to watch it later. Well, rebalance power, collaboration, building resilience, system change, limits to growth, rewriting the rules, disrupting the mindset. That's some of the key ideas of this panel, and we will hear from advocates that have experience on the ground and can suggest how we can start talking about people and the environment, taking people and the environment into account. And we will talk with companies and funders that have begun their journey in making this shift a reality. We have here Leslie Johnson, from CEO of the Loudness Foundation, Bala Murungu, Program Advisor of the Freedom Fund, Sandrine Dixon de Clough, Co-President of Club of Rome, and Jocelyn Wilkinson, Responsibility Program Director at Burberry. Thank you all for being here today, joining us in this conversation. Well, quickly, I want to share with you all some important data. Recently, the Oxfam International and the Stockholm Environment Institute have released a new reporting stating that the wealthiest 1% of the population were responsible for emitting more than twice as much as carbon dioxide as the poor half of the world between 1990 and 2015. The richest 10% of the global population, comprising about 600 million people, were responsible for about 52% of global emissions over the 20 years period the study have showed. And while global emissions are significantly concentrated in some classes, countries, and industrial sectors, it is the people, countries, and classes that least contribute to climate disruption who have the least resources to deal with its consequences and are most susceptible to the effects of climate change. People of the global south, women, and non-white people. As the recent Global Fashion Agenda and McKinsey report, Fashion on Climate, highlights, fashion is an important contributor to climate disruption, and if the industry does not take responsibility, the Paris Accord will be just a distant utopia. But offset carbon emissions, and Naomi Klein, an activist that is consistently explaining, will not work. We need real change, and we need to recognize the injustice and exploitation in the roots of our economic system, and that it's our current business models and mindset that are leading us not just to climate disruption, but total social and environmental collapse with staggering rates of inequality. So this is not particularly new for Club of Rome, an organization that has been questioning the limits of growth and accumulation fetish since the 70s. Sandrine, COVID-19 is just a small taste of the kind of social and environmental disruption we can expect if we all go back to business as usual, even if we go back to a better version of business as usual, right? Why must we act now?
Take myself off mute. Thank you so much, Marina, first of all, for this invitation, because we all know how important the fashion industry is to shifting our economic system and in particular our consumption patterns. I think that I want to first of all, read you a very important quote. The first is that we have to remember that this thinking around changing of the system and the fact that we're over consuming has been around since 1972, it's almost 50 years, right? And the limits to growth clearly indicated that this supreme effort is a challenge for our generation 50 years ago. It cannot be passed on to the next. The effort must be resolutely undertaken without delay, and a significant shift and redirection must be achieved during this decade. So if we think that that was said in 1972, and now we're 50 years later, and we are actually saying the same thing. All of us who are working in the area of the planetary emergency and the climate emergency, and have heard Greta and Johan Rockström and the Stockholm Institute say very clearly, we have a decade of action. And yet we already know that we have all the solutions, but we don't have the expansive political will or business will to do what we needed to. So my call in particular to the fashion industry is that we have to both look at reducing consumption as well as shifting our materials and look at circularity and regenerative economies at the same time. Now, we are part of the COP26 and the COP15 conversations around biodiversity and climate change. And we have been saying very clearly that we now have economies that have put in place new indicators to growth that are shifting away from GDP growth and that are looking at how they cost externalities into their system. As we're faced with the convergence of tipping points between COVID, a health pandemic, climate, and biodiversity, those companies and those economies that have actually looked at the risk of stranded assets and that have actually integrated thinking around being more resilient by protecting the environment, by reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and investing in the future are actually coming out much stronger. So I'll talk a little bit more around the new economic thinking, but I really want to urge the industry in particular, because you have such an impact, both in terms of your relationship with consumers, but also the way in which you use natural resources in every single part of your business to really create that shift. And I made a call last year at the Fashion Summit. I said, I don't want to be making the same calls this year. I have not seen the transformative shift of the sector that is necessary, both in dematerialization and the reduction of consumption, as well as substitution of materials, moving through also circularity and regenerative economies. So I am hopeful that we will really see that shift as we move forward, because we have to build resilient economies to these convergence of tipping points. And to be frank, people are not going to need a lot more clothes if they're actually sitting on Zoom calls because they're confined with the convergence of these tipping points and the pandemic that we have before us. So let's be clear, materials are not necessary. Access to healthcare, access to food, access to water, and ensuring people's lives and livelihoods are what's most important at this time. So I hope that the sector will step up to the plate and be part of this transformative change that we need and building that resilience that we need.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. Very important points you made. Let me just remember the audience that if you have questions, you can post them on the chat, and we'll be going back to that after our speakers' quotes. So let's go to Leslie. Sandrine mentioned that she was here last year saying that she doesn't want to do the same demand for the fashion industry, but now here we are, and to act now, it sounds like we need to start valuing the essential things that keep us alive, our business running, air, water, biodiversity, and of course people. But global capitalism is built upon excess, consumption, and inequality with a very short-term vision. Can we talk about redesigning the fashion system without challenging capitalism itself?
That sounds like a loaded question, but the short answer is no, we cannot. And I do want to repeat what Sandrine said, that is indeed the tragedy of the current volume-driven, cost-driven fast fashion system, which has become crystal clear during COVID. But of course, it's been very clear over the past couple decades. And while this global neoliberal capitalist system has done much good, and as we know in fashion, has often created the first jobs for many female garment workers around the world, it is failing to create dignified and safe working conditions. And it's failing to protect or even regenerate nature. Why? Well, it all comes down to what we value. And under this neoliberal capitalist system, which has pervaded how we think, how we act, how we measure what's important, value has become equal to market price. So for example, GDP has often been seen as the main indicator of economic progress, but as we all are aware, it falls short in measuring well-being. Its measurement of progress is not based on market price, and it leaves out things that we actually value. It's not necessarily these material things, but it's the care economy, it's the quality of environment, it's the equitable distribution of income. It's an imperfect measurement. And in our view, capitalism has tremendous power, and we've seen it unleash vast creativity And of course, one of the most creative industries we know, the fashion industry, has benefited from that. But the system's flawed because we're not valuing what's important. We're not treating garment workers with dignity and respect. We're not respecting the natural resources on which the industry depends. We're not putting a price on environmental degradation. Fashion alone counts for at least 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, but that will rise if we don't do anything. It uses 43 million tons of chemicals per year. That's over 8,000 chemicals on a single piece of clothing. So what we'd like to see is a different kind of capitalism, one that harnesses the power of the market, that has incentives and protections in place to be able to, at the same time, value all people and respect nature. And at Loudest Foundation, we believe this is possible, and this is going to sound a little bit Pollyannish, but only if all actors, business, government, civil society, play their role. And we need to step up. Government needs to step up to ensure better social protections for workers. This was tragically evident during COVID in countries like Bangladesh, where millions of garment workers did not receive their wages when brands pulled back on orders. And of course, we need to put a price on environmental degradation. The externalities in this industry, such as the high use of water and cotton, the polluting of rivers, need to be costed and incorporated into the price of the t-shirt. And in my view, that would allow capitalism to do its magic, but also make sure that the true cost of a product is incorporated in the final market price. And if we have such radical transparency, then it will also enable each of us as citizens and users of fashion to become more informed and to make informed decisions when we visit our favorite shops.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, Bala, your work with Freedom Fund is exactly about promoting justice and equality within the fashion supply chain. Well, as Sandrine mentioned earlier, companies will need resilient supply chains from now on, but they will not come with buyers chasing the cheapest country to produce their goods. That is the basic modus operandi of the neoliberal agenda. So how has this way of functioning affected the producing communities through the supply chain, and what needs to change to guarantee dignity and basic human rights?
Thank you, Mana. Greetings to all. Tamil Nadu, where I live and work, is known as the textile hub of India. It's the largest producer of cotton yarn in India and a center for government production for export. There are more than 2,000 spinning mills located in the state and that produce yarn to transform into cloth that is used in the manufacture of garments exported around the world. But in spite of several efforts taken, there are persistent problems with the working conditions in this textile supply chain. There are significant right violations taking place in the spinning mills, where the majority of the workforce are women and adolescent girls. If you see, more than 80% constitute women and adolescent girls. In some cases, these conditions amount to forced labor, abusive practices that have been documented by international and local civil society include excessive and involuntary overtime, extremely low wages, sexual, verbal, and physical harassment, working conditions that inflict chronic illness and frequent injuries, lack of freedom of movement and association, and denial of statutory benefits like Provident Fund and employer state insurance. So brand sourcing and purchasing practices can exacerbate rights violations. If suppliers are expected to manufacture at increasingly lower costs in order to compete for business, it is the workers that suffer the most. Basically, they'll become the victim. This is true even beyond direct suppliers to brands, where the impact of unfair purchasing practices can negatively affect the working conditions further down the supply chain. At least up to tier 1, there is some kind of monitoring, but beyond tier 1, it's the condition is very worse. Although it's important to raise awareness of the conditions that young women face in the mills, we don't want brands to cut and run from this supply chain. So they need to have a sustained purchasing practices. In Tamil Nadu, the textile industry provides vital employment. It's a very big employment source, providing employment approximately to 300,000 workers. And the impact already, they have also explained left the industrial workers in a very precarious condition. There should be an action to rebuild supply chains more ethically. So that we need to consider where value is not just placed in generating profits, but also in supporting workers' rights. So equally, it should be, there should be a balance between the profit and the respecting the workers' rights. Companies should invest in supporting the development of a stronger, more rights respecting industry in the countries that they are sourcing from. For example, textile industry in Tamil Nadu. Rather than moving to whatever the cost of production is cheapest, brands should look to invest in suppliers in key regions and develop long-term sourcing relationship there. So it might solve the issues to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you, Bala. Well, Jocelyn, when we talk about brands and companies that and what they can do for sustainability, and exactly what, especially what Bala said about not moving beyond one cheapest supplier to another. There's a white elephant in the room. That is the model of excessive production itself, dependent on excessive consumption. That is exactly what Sandrine mentioned in her speech. But it's not uncommon to hear that the luxury segment is the most prepared to change this model. Do you agree with that? What is the main challenges Burberry has accepted in this regard, and how can luxury inspire change in other segments too?
Thanks, Marina. You're right. It's a global challenge, and it's not just a challenge for this industry, it's a challenge across industries. We do have a slight advantage in that, of course, we encourage our customers to love their products and love them for as long as possible. We make products to an amazing quality, and we offer a really, really extensive repair and aftercare service. In fact, we deal with about 20,000 repair queries every year, and sometimes those products are decades old, and we're very happy to repair them. So there is a benefit that we have, but of course we need to look to the future, exactly as Sandrine was saying. We take a long-term view, as we believe every brand should, acting in this space. And actually we're working on 2040 scenario modeling to understand what the world will look like then, how we need to adapt, and how we need to change to make sure that we and our supply chains and those communities that rely on those supply chains can continue to be resilient. But what I think is really, really important is there isn't just action for tomorrow and looking towards tomorrow. We have to act now. All brands have to act today. And there are lots and lots of things that brands can do. So activating some of those levers for change, whether they're really big or really small, is critical, and is something that we are really, really dedicated to and have been for over 12 years. So thinking about small things, making shopping bags out of coffee cups that have been used, for example, is a small example, right through to maintaining really strong values during the COVID crisis in relation to our supply chain partners with whom we have long-term relationships. At the longest, we have 120-year relationships with some of our supply chain partners. And it's really, the relationship we have with them is really, really important. Through to managing implementation of environmental, social, and governance criteria into our remuneration, and also harnessing sustainable finance, to one of the points that Sandrine made. We were really proud to release information about our sustainable bond a couple of weeks ago to the tune of £300 million. That's bringing our investors on this sustainable journey with us, and something that we see as critical to actually bringing the sort of sustainability efforts of the company to the center of decision making, and linking with our investors. So I think it's about sort of a constant evolution, and making sure that sustainability is increasingly put to the center of our brand, and of the decision making within the brand at every level, small levels and big levels.
Well, before we go to the next part of our panel, I want to remind the audience that everybody can leave questions on the chat, so we can reply for the questions later on. Well, Sandrine, we heard some specific challenges now. Everybody put some challenges and some solutions on the table. But in your experience, what initiatives have you seen that can serve as inspiration for fashion, and over how long should this change happen? Because exactly that's exactly the point you made about Club of Rome releasing the manifesto 52 years ago, and we don't have much time. So can you share with us some inspired examples, and how long can we take to make the changes?
Well, so I'm going to be very clear. We are in an emergency situation. That's why we published a planetary emergency. And we do have some real calls to action. And together we're trying to make that happen. We probably will surpass our 1.5 degree goal already by 2030. I mean, this is new data that's coming out. So it's really sobering. But then by the same token, I've participated in a variety of different conferences through the textiles industry and other materials. We are seeing decarbonization of high energy materials like cement industry that's actually going to net zero right now, as well as aluminium. And we're also seeing brand new fibers and new recycling and reuse techniques. We're seeing a lot of companies that are doing exactly what Burberry is doing and trying to really generate a circular economy. But we haven't brought it to scale. And that for me is key. And I think that the other key point, exactly as Leslie continued to build on the well-being economy, is that we need to fully change our indicators within our economy. We need to work with people to make them understand that actually owning more and the current ownership models that we have are not the right ones. Now, that will be that actually companies will probably have to take a hit. But I think that if we properly cost the real cost of materials and also labor, then we can really start to enhance people's lives and livelihoods. And that's what we need to talk about. So what are we seeing specifically in terms of economic shifts? We now have 5 global economies in different countries: Scotland, Iceland, New Zealand, Finland, Wales, we're bringing in Costa Rica, potentially Canada, who are implementing well-being economics. These economies are actually embedding society and nature into their indicators. So when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about natural capital, human capital, and resources being the essence of what we call compassionate capitalism, which is very much what Paul Pullman also talks about. So we're totally shifting the bar. We are looking at indicators which are bringing in actually a 3-pillar approach. So economic indicators that look at jobs, employment, distribution of wealth, with societal indicators, which brings in health and social care, education, community well-being and culture, with environmental indications. And those are the 3 key pillars that make up a well-being economy. And let me just bring one last unbelievable example. At the local level, at the community level, we are seeing a variety of different capitals. Just now, Brussels, before that, Amsterdam, picking up on donut economics. Donut economics were created by Kate Raworth, a member of the Club of Rome, who clearly demonstrated how you can actually put in place an economic model within the constraints of the planetary boundaries and put nature and people at the core of your model and still be able to develop economically, but not using GDP growth as your only measure of how development happens. So this is incredibly positive and demonstrates the way in which we can move forward. And as I said, we have investment statistics which are clearly indicating from the investment community that coming out of COVID, it is those companies that have environmental, social, and governance principles, ESG principles, embedded into their business models that are coming out more resilient post-COVID. So they are already de-risking their value chains. That is a positive feedback loop on the way in which we should move forward.
Jocelyn, we know that change don't happen overnight. And Sandrine bring to us some examples of what can be done, and also you too when you talk about the Burberry actions. But it's been a while since we've been talking about incremental change and small steps to a bigger transition. How can the industry change with incremental steps, but without being condescending and committing to specific goals? Because something that is always lacking is objective goals. I will reduce this much of CO emissions. I will upgrade this much of salary in supply chain or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, thank you. Well, as I mentioned before, I think it's really about kind of having one foot in the future and one foot in the present, and trying to use all of that knowledge to manipulate how we can actually have a strategy that fully drives some of the changes in behavior that we know we need to see within the industry. So if I'm looking at today, really using our voice, so for example, through brand moments like the show, and bringing to life some of the sustainability messaging through the biggest event that we do in the year. And so we talked about our carbon regeneration fund through our show communications most recently. And we're really proud to do things like that, because actually that's what's driving trend. That's what's getting the interest of the consumer and of the great many people who are influenced by the trends within the fashion industry. So using our voice is something that's very, very powerful. And then really kind of being the change that we want to see in a visible way is critical. So, I mean, you might not know this, but our stores are powered by 90% renewable energy. We have a goal of 100%, obviously, and we're running ahead of time in terms of meeting that goal. And rightly so, it's taken a lot of effort to get there. There were countries where it wasn't available at the time we started that strategy. And I think embarking on things where you don't know what the answer is the right thing to do in order to drive sustainable business progress. Looking at sort of the core of our business and thinking about our products, you mentioned sort of having tangible goals. We have a goal of having 100% of our products with more than one positive attribute by 2022. The work that we do internally and with our supply chain partners to deliver those positive attributes is audited on an annual basis by external auditors, and we publish that information. At the moment, we're tracking to 89% of products driving positive change. And that means lots of different things, because positive change has to mean lots of different things, whether they're social or environmental. So for example, that might mean that a leather bag comes from certified tanneries. It might mean that a factory has significant energy saving activities going on. We're using sustainable cotton, we're using recycled materials, or we're driving well-being and living wages within a facility. All of those things are key component parts of what sustainable apparel really looks like. And I think driving it through your product and very clearly reporting on those KPIs is critical, and something that we find, you know, a great challenge, of course, because we have partners to bring along with us. But if it's properly integrated into the core of your business, it's doable. And I think, you know, we would urge every one of our collaborators within the industry, whether they be brands or whether they be suppliers of ours, to join us in that fight to make all products more sustainable and driving sustainable change. And then lastly, I think this is something, you know, obviously Leslie's organization does incredibly well, and that's harnessing the power of philanthropy. There's something incredibly positive there, where we can, in some cases, take risks, but also identify needs within communities on which this industry relies. In order to meet those needs, we can deploy some of our philanthropic efforts. And so we have a fully separate Burberry Foundation, and we carry out efforts all over the world in surprising ways, I think you'll find. So we have a significant program in Afghanistan, for example, where there's a lot of cashmere sourcing. You know, there are a lot of livelihoods in that country that absolutely desperately need to rely on legitimate trade. And so we need to build that legitimate trade, because that will support that geography in a way that perhaps other efforts may not be able to support them. And we do that always in partnership. So in that case with Oxfam. Or the program that we have in New York and Yorkshire in the UK, looking at young people and how we can inspire them about careers in the creative industries. and how we can give them touch points with our volunteers, for example, or with going to theatres and going to ballets, and actually now having more virtual interactions with some of those cultural activities, so that they have a different perspective on life and they can see more than they might be able to see through their family networks, for example, especially during this really challenging time. We need to challenge ourselves to deploy all of the sort of strategic thinking that we do as a company to really think about how that can support some of the philanthropic efforts of the Burberry Foundation. And over the last 3 years, we've been able to positively influence the lives of 200,000 people through those 3 programs that I just mentioned. And I think it's really, really important that we accept we don't have all the answers, but sometimes delving into the problems and the needs can teach us an awful lot. And I think that, you know, one of the main things we've been learning, whether it's through renewable energy or the foundation programs I just mentioned, is that collaboration is really, really king here. If we can collaborate effectively with the right organizations in the right places, we can bring about change. And that's really, really important to demonstrate, bring home to your kind of internal audience and your staff, because they're desperate to know that kind of information, but also to take, where appropriate, to your external audience and help them build a picture of what it really looks like to act responsibly within the apparel industry.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Well, Bala, there's something that I was thinking about, that you've probably seen and experienced many comings and goings when it comes to industry commitments to our suppliers. Well, which programs have been most successful and could be replicated as a way of ensuring justice and dignity for those who make our clothes?
As civil society, we have been working on improving the conditions for workers in textile mills in Tamil Nadu for many years. We are working or engaging constantly with local and state government and the industrial bodies and associations to support the implementation of labor protections, laws and legislations related to workers' protection. However, we believe improving the situation for workers in textile mills requires a supply chain solution. So it cannot be handled in one region and one particular block or in Tamil Nadu, because globally it has been a problem. So we need a supply chain solution. Apart from a few brands that they have engaged in the region, international business are almost been absent. Even where they exist, initiatives have been limited in scope and have tended to adopt the top-down approach that rarely provides space for local civil society to participate. So we need to admit that there has been a limited movement by the global fashion industry to take action. We believe that there is untapped power in the influence of the global apparel industry to collectively try and improve the conditions in the textile supply chain. By joining forces with the local civil society, industry can chart a common route to ensure that textile workers are able to uphold their basic rights and dignity. This is why the Tamil Nadu Alliance, where I am also one of the founding members, which has created Tamil Nadu Declaration. The declaration is a call to action that we have developed as a grassroots civil society network, outlining the steps that we believe are needed by the fashion industry to address exploitative conditions in the textile and spinning mills. Through the declaration, we are asking international brands and retailers to take action across 5 major goals, which will lead to address the severe exploitation that may be occurring in the textile supply chain. So it includes expanding the supply chain transparency to all the manufacturing facilities. That's the first goal that we are asking. So they can fix the time frame and they can work on it. The second thing, support the effective implementation of labor laws and protection in Tamil Nadu. It's not only in Tamil Nadu, as a whole of India, because there are several legislation that have been diluted in India in the form of amalgamation of labor codes. So that we need to work together with the brands. Then adopt sustainable sourcing and purchasing models that promote decent working conditions throughout the supply chain. This is very, very important. Even in the last time I mentioned it. So sustainable sourcing is very, very important for the supply chain. Then integrate worker-driven approaches to monitor compliances with the labor standards. Then the labor standards could be monitored by the laborers rather than external third party. Then the fifth one is the collective grievance mechanism. This is absolutely not available for the workers. So we need to, brands and civil societies, industries need to work together to develop a collective grievance mechanism so that the issues of the workers are addressed and they lead a dignified life. So importantly, we need to adopt a collaborative approach with the brands. We want to work with them to improve conditions for workers in the industry because we realize that our efforts won't be effective in isolation. When we join with the other actors, definitely, we can make very good changes. This is true. This is true not just in Tamil Nadu, but even in other textile and apparel hubs around the world. So, this kind of collaborative approaches could be replicated to bring the changes and in the lives of the workers and improving the conditions inside the mill and ensure their dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Bala. Well, before we go to the questions, I have one more for Leslie now. Well, Leslie, as a founder, how do you believe we can rewrite the rules and shift the power dynamics so the ones who are most vulnerable and also that are the majority of the world population can write their own future based upon justice, respect, and equality? And why collaborative platforms such as Fashion for Good are critical for accelerating such out-of-the-box thinking?
Great, thank you. Well, I think Jocelyn did a good job of pitching philanthropy, so thank you, Jocelyn. I don't need to go into how philanthropy plays a role. I mean, I do firmly believe there is a role for philanthropy because we can take risk, we can de-risk for others, we can try things that haven't been tried. For Loudest Foundation, we are relatively new kid on the block. We launched in January, and over the past 8 months, we've been consulting with about 250 stakeholders to understand exactly what role should we play. Because at the end of the day, philanthropic funding is minuscule compared to the power of business and finance and government funding that fuels these economies. So for us, it actually boiled down to 3 systemic intervention points that we as a foundation are targeting, which are very much influenced, Sandrine, by Donella Meadows' thinking, who of course was part of the Limits to Growth. And the first place that we intervene as a foundation is around mindsets. Ultimately, we need to change the narrative. We need to change the way each of us views and thinks about this industry. And again, this sounds very Pollyanna, but I don't want to underestimate the power of language and narrative. How do we convince CEOs that business as usual is no longer acceptable? Because actually we're in an existential crisis. And we fund things such as research around S-curves that help CEOs understand how long it's going to take for innovation to actually scale. If you want to be, sort of net zero carbon by 2050, you need to start yesterday. So as a foundation, we're focusing on research to try to help change those minds. The second leverage point that we tackle is power. We all know that the power dynamics in fashion are lopsided, and we have to address this. I think, Freedom Fund, which is one of our partners, has been addressing that very well. You just gave the example of how workers are monitoring as opposed to being monitored. So there's lots of examples of how garment workers can actually take more power. But as a funder, we need to do more around that, and we need to actually focus on how can we put people and nature first as opposed to profit. And of course, power dynamics come into that. And the third leverage point that we focus on is the rules, which is my favorite. I love rules because rules govern our global economic system, and changing them is key to change. And I think, as Sandrine said, we do have an opening now. Yes, we've been talking for many decades about the system and how it's broken, but we do also see an opening in the clouds where people are imagining the Great Reset and what that means. So if we take advantage of this opening, what does that mean for our role as a foundation? And this is where we're coming in to actually try to influence through our partners those carrots and sticks, which can actually govern corporate behavior. So for example, you may be aware that the mandatory human rights due diligence legislation is on the uptake. And that's a good thing, because if more and more national legislations adopt this, then it becomes imperative with teeth for companies to know what's going on in their supply chains. And we need that teeth, because we know that voluntary efforts are not enough. The self-governing we've seen in the fashion industry won't get us to where we need to go. So what do we do about this? You mentioned Fashion for Good. And what I love about Fashion for Good is it's a collaborative platform for innovation, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because in the fashion industry, innovation was always your competitive advantage. But what if you bring everyone around the table and actually collaborate around innovation and support innovations that can look at clothing as a service as opposed to clothing as a product? And to date, Fashion for Good has actually nurtured about 110 innovators thus far out of about 2,000. It's unlocked about 130 million euros in funding, and it has about 20 corporate partners. So it is a very powerful platform for us to think about how do we change business as usual. But it's important to know that we're not going to do that by ourselves. We need to partner and collaborate with others.
Well, we have some questions, but unfortunately we don't have much time for the questions, but I appreciate everybody that is sending questions to us. I will choose one or two that we can address here. And one it's very interesting, it's how business models that balance profit and environmental social responsibility will not wield as much short-term profit as current models. How can companies adhere to this kind of long-term vision? Especially because surveys say consumers aren't ready to pay more for the products. So I think maybe Sandrine or Jocelyn can take that one.
I'm happy to take part of it, but I think Jocelyn should take it from a producer perspective as well, obviously. The only thing that I would say is that, again, statistically, what we're starting to see is that there is a shift. You need to shift also your relationship with shareholders. If we look at what Paul Polman has done with Unilever and many other companies now that are looking at the way in which they can share some of the responsibility in a much longer term perspective than short term in terms of the turnaround. So I think that we are seeing that there's a real shift. And as I said as well, we're also seeing that those companies that are coming out more resilient because they've de-risked their value chain. I mean, look at where we are now. Don't think of the past. The past is the past. We are in a totally new world. And within this new world, if we don't de-risk the way in which we do business based on environmental and social externalities, I don't think any of us are going to survive. So I would say, don't go back to business as usual. And what we're seeing is there is a positive profit. The profit is different though. It's much more distributed, it's much more equitable, and it's going to make us much more resilient in the long term. So you may not get all the money at the top, and you may not get the money in certain hands. It might be more distributed, but at the end, it will make you much more resilient as a company in the long term.
Thanks, Sandrine. I'll take over and add a few points to that, if I may. I think there are sort of two critical things here. One is, it's very clear, every consumer study you look at, they want to know that their products are driving sustainable change. They may have different ideas on what that means, and in different geographies around the world, they may be more keen on one topic than another topic, but the summary is they're keen on it. And so I think we're speaking directly to consumers when we make this happen. And we had an amazing example of this back in April. As you might remember, the world was busy in April and there was a lot of noise, but we released what we called the Re-Burberry Edit. And it was a collection of items which were either made of organic or recycled materials, for example, and also made in the factories where we're driving some of the change I mentioned around renewables and energy saving and so on. And we had an amazing response rate. Consumers are very interested when you give them the information about the products. So I think that's sort of one side. The other side is, and I touched on it earlier, I think you have to drive the sustainable change through the way in which you make your money. And that means attaching targets to products. And when we developed this strategy back in 2017, we were very clear that it had to be attached to product. And it couldn't be 95% or 20% or whatever, because there's always always confusion then. If you make it 100%, then you're all working to the same goal. Us in the responsibility team, our supply chain team, who are amazing partners of ours, our product development teams, our design teams, and most importantly, our supply chain partners. Everybody would understand if it had 100% attached to it, there was no question. It's happening. It's going to be difficult, but we'll all do it together. And I think that's what's really, really important. It doesn't necessarily answer the big, big question you've asked, but I think it goes some of the way to be able to answer that question.
Well, thank you, Jocelyn. You did a great wrap up because I don't have time to wrap up. So thank you, everyone, and keep up with us during Copenhagen Fashion Summit Plus.
Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Bye, Marina.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
And now to the last part of CFS Plus, the breakout sessions. If you've forgotten which one you want to attend, go back to the program and find your online session there. That's all for today. From me here at Copenhagen Concert Hall, I hope to see you all tomorrow. I'll be back, same time, same place. Stay safe until then and enjoy the breakout sessions.